Welcome to Charlie's Bedtime Stories. A Roman wedding night did not begin in bed. It began with a flame-colored veil, a torchlit procession, rude songs in the street, and a threshold the bride was not expected to cross on foot. For prosperous citizen families in Rome and urban Italy, this was a carefully ordered passage from one family home into another. We will follow that passage from dusk until the next morning. From the bride's ritual clothing and public procession, through the guarded doorway and private chamber, to her first offering in the new household. These customs come mainly from the late Republic and early Empire. The surviving sources preserve ritual more clearly than emotion. So our journey begins with documented objects, not invented thoughts, inside the house of the bride's father. At dusk, the bride is still part of her father's household, preparing to leave it. The most visible part of her clothing is the flammeum, a bright flame-colored bridal veil. It is more than decoration. Among everyone gathered for the departure, the woman beneath it is immediately recognizable as the bride. Beneath the veil, her hair is divided into 6 braids known as the senicrines. They are arranged with the point of a spear called the asta calibaris. The sources preserve the formal pattern and the unusual tool. They do not preserve the sensation of sitting through the work. Her tunic is fastened with the nodus herculeus, the Hercules Knot. The cord will remain tied throughout every public stage of the wedding. It will be loosened only inside the private chamber. Before the bride has even left her father's house, the wedding night is already underway. Her ritual clothing has prepared her for a public passage, not an immediate retreat to bed. Outside, torchlight gathers near the doorway. The approaching procession changes the purpose of everything she is wearing. The flame-colored veil will be seen in the street. The 6 braids will remain in place as the company moves between houses, and the knot will stay secure while the marriage is still surrounded by witnesses. These objects cannot reveal what any particular bride thought about the evening. One marriage might differ greatly from another in age, familiarity, family circumstances, and personal feeling. The clothing preserves neither eagerness nor reluctance, neither confidence nor fatigue. What it does preserve is public recognition. Here was a bride visibly marked for a formal transfer from one household to another. Her wedding night began while other people could still see her, and while her destination still lay beyond a city street. The bright veil reaches the doorway. The stillness of preparation gives way to moving torchlight, and the first part of the night passes out of the house. The nighttime procession was called the deductio. It formally escorted the bride from her father's house to the home of her husband. The distance varied according to the families involved, but the direction of the ritual was unmistakable. She was leaving one domestic space and being received into another. Torches made the transfer visible. Their light moved across the procession, the nearby walls, and the worn paving stones before leaving each one behind. Near the center of the company, the flame-colored veil remained easy to distinguish. This was not a silent or entirely solemn journey. Guests threw walnuts or muses to people gathered along the route. Some could be caught, others struck the street and rolled beyond the light. A Roman wedding procession might therefore leave behind a scattered trail of remarkably ordinary objects. The company also sang humorous and ribald verses traditionally associated with weddings. These are often called festive verses. Their precise words are not needed here. Their tone is what matters. They allowed deliberate impropriety within a formal ceremony. Roman taste was quite capable of placing elaborate ritual beside rude wedding songs without finding the combination especially strange. The bride moved through two kinds of attention at once. Her clothing marked her solemn role in the transfer between households. Around her, people laughed, sang, carried torches, and threw walnuts into the crowd. The marriage was serious. The procession did not have to behave seriously at every moment. This public display is one of the strongest contrasts in the Roman wedding night. The evening was moving toward a private room, yet it reached that room by becoming conspicuous. The bride's passage was made visible and audible to relatives, guests, and anyone close enough to encounter the procession. The street also brought practical disorder. Torches had to remain upright. A group moving together had to adjust its pace. Sandaled feet met worn paving, while long bridal clothing traveled through an ordinary urban setting that did not become smooth simply because a ceremony occupied it. Yet the procession had a fixed destination. Songs could spread outward, and walnuts could bounce beyond the torchlight. Still, the bride continued toward one particular doorway. The formal movement remained controlled within the celebration's temporary unruliness. The veil that had filled the room at dusk now appeared and disappeared in shifting light. Beneath it, the 6 braids remained ordered. Beneath the folds of the tunic, the Hercules Knot was still tied. Every object introduced in the father's house was being carried intact toward the husband's home. No single emotion can safely be placed beneath the veil. The procession tells us where the bride stood and how she was presented. It cannot tell us how she experienced each step. The public sequence was shared. Its private meanings were not. As the groom's house came into view, the shape of the company changed. The route narrowed toward an entrance. The torches gathered closer, and those behind the bride slowed. The raised sill replaced the open street as the center of attention. After a visible journey between two households, the next stage depended on clearing a very small piece of stone. At the groom's doorway, attention falls toward the bride's feet. Behind her are the torches, the guests, the songs, and the street. Ahead lies the interior of the new household. Between the two is the threshold. On an ordinary day, a raised sill is a minor inconvenience. At the end of a crowded nighttime procession with long clothing and uncertain light, it becomes easier to misjudge. During a wedding, however, a stumble could be interpreted as more than clumsiness. It could appear to be an ill-omened beginning. The bride was therefore carried over the threshold rather than left to risk catching her foot upon it. Ancient writers offered several explanations for this custom. Avoiding a stumble should not be presented as its one certain origin. It was, however, a leading and highly practical concern. For a moment, the bride's feet did not touch the sill. She passed from street to household without taking the dangerous step herself. A tiny architectural obstacle became a carefully managed part of the marriage ritual. There is a familiar claim that she was carried solely because a bride represented stolen property, but that reduces a layered custom to one dramatic explanation. Ancient discussions were less tidy. Roman doorways marked important boundaries, and the manner of entering could carry ritual weight. Whatever other meanings gathered around the act, no one wanted the bride to trip. There is something characteristically practical in this mixture of omen and bodily movement. The company has organized ritual braids, a bright veil, torches, songs, and a public transfer. Then the success of the entrance comes down to clearing 1 or 2 inches of stone. Once inside, the bride's surroundings change. The flame-colored veil is no longer moving through an open street. Voices remain nearby, but walls and doorways begin to separate one part of the company from another. The procession does not end all at once. It contracts. Until this point, the bride has remained at the center of a crowd. She was recognizable in her father's house, displayed in the street, and accompanied to her husband's door. At the threshold, the crowd can take her no farther in quite the same way. The safely crossed sill becomes the hinge of the night. On one side, the marriage has been announced through movement, light, laughter, and witnesses. On the other, the ritual begins directing the bride towards a smaller, more private space. She has not yet reached the marriage couch. One final recognized guide must lead her there. Not the noisy procession as a whole, but a respected married woman chosen for the role. As the larger company remains behind, that matron takes charge of the next stage. Inside the groom's house, the bride is escorted by the pronuba. She is a respected matron who has been married only once, a woman described as a univira. Her marital standing makes her an appropriate guide for the final ritual approach to the marriage couch. The pronuba continues the evening's carefully managed movement. The bride does not simply enter from the street and find her own way. The procession brings her to the threshold. The crossing is protected. Then the matron escorts her father into the house. Their destination is the lectus genialis, the marriage couch. A couch is an ordinary piece of domestic furniture. Here, however, it has a particular place in the wedding sequence. It marks the point where public guidance approaches its limit. The pronuba leads the bride toward it, but she does not remain to turn everything that follows into a witnessed performance. Once her escorting role is complete, the couple retires within the chamber while the others remain outside. That boundary matters because later European wedding customs are sometimes projected backward onto ancient Rome. Roman guests did not remain inside the room to witness the marriage being consummated. The celebration might continue elsewhere, but the chamber was not made into a public spectacle. The crowd could escort, watch, sing, and accompany. It could fill the route between the two houses and gather around the entrance. It did not cross the final boundary with the couple. The pronuba stood at the edge between ritual assistance and marital privacy. Her presence gave the bride a recognized guide to the marriage couch. Her withdrawal allowed the social ceremony to stop where the private part of the night began. The narrowing of space had taken place gradually. First came the bride's father's house, where her clothing prepared her to be seen. Then came the street, filled by a moving company. The groom's doorway formed a controlled boundary, and the pronuba reduced the company still further. Now the chamber contains only the couple. The surviving evidence cannot reveal the mood within that room. Some couples may have known each other well, others may not. The circumstances of Roman marriages differed, and one imagined scene cannot represent them all. What the evidence does preserve is the location of privacy. Rome could surround the bride's transfer with witnesses while leaving the chamber unwitnessed. The change was not sudden. Privacy was approached, one threshold and one doorway at a time. The marriage couch rests within that last enclosed space. The songs remain beyond the wall, and the veil has completed its public journey. One ritual object, however, still awaits its final documented action. The Hercules Knot has remained tied since dusk. Behind the closed boundary, the groom now turns to it. The Hercules Knot is small enough to disappear within a large celebration, yet it provides one of the clearest recorded actions inside the private chamber. After the guests had withdrawn outside the room, the groom loosened the knot on the bride's tunic. The act completes something begun before the procession. A cord tied in the bride's father's house traveled intact through the street, over the threshold, and toward the marriage couch. It was undone only after every public stage was complete. This is as close as the documented sequence brings us to the couple's private experience. It gives us an object, an action, and the absence of the crowd. It does not preserve conversation. It does not tell us whether the cord came loose easily or awkwardly, or what either person thought as it did. Those silences should not be filled with one convenient story. Roman evidence often preserves what a ritual required more clearly than what individuals felt while performing it. The knot is visible to history. The emotional life around it is not. Age is another subject where modern assumptions can move too quickly. Roman law allowed girls to marry from the age of 12. That was a legal minimum. It is not proof that every Roman bride married at 12, nor does it describe every household represented by these customs. Historical records suggest that elite women often married in their middle to late teens. Patterns changed with the century, social class, political circumstances, and family strategy. A prosperous urban wedding could involve a young bride, but her precise age cannot be inferred from the veil, the procession, or the knot. Nor should one bride's circumstances be made to represent every marriage across the Roman world. The sequence followed here belongs mainly to prosperous citizen households in Rome and urban Italy during the late Republic and early Empire. Even within that narrower setting, individual lives varied. Ritual supplied a common structure. It did not create a common private experience. The knot allows us to remain with what the evidence supports. It was part of the bridal clothing. It remained tied during the public transfer, and the groom loosened it after the others had withdrawn outside the chamber. Beyond those points, historical restraint is more accurate than vivid reconstruction. There is no need to place imaginary witnesses in the room. The guests were outside. There is no need to invent dialogue, whether affectionate, uneasy, comic, or cruel. Whatever words actual couples exchanged disappeared with the people who spoke them. The closed door, therefore, marks two boundaries. In the ancient ceremony, it separated the couple from the gathering. For us, it separates recorded ritual from an experience that was never recorded. On one side remains a collection of visible details: flame-colored cloth, 6 braids, torchlight and walnuts, a stone sill, a respected matron, and a prepared couch. On the other side lies the unpreserved inner life of 2 individuals. A Roman wedding night could not have felt the same in every marriage. It might have been familiar or uncertain, welcome or difficult, depending on the people and the circumstances involved. The evidence does not flatten that range into one universal account. The loosened knot remains the last clearly documented action inside the nighttime chamber. It is private without being graphic, and it matters because of its place in the sequence. What had been secured before witnesses was unfastened after those witnesses had gone. At that point, the sources fall quiet. The songs have faded. The pronuba has withdrawn. The threshold lies safely behind the bride. The next clearly visible part of the marriage belongs to the household in morning light. The morning after the wedding night brought a domestic celebration known as the ripocha. Its setting was no longer the moving street procession or the closed edge of the chamber. Attention turned instead to the bride's place within the new household. During this observance, she made her first offerings to the gods of her husband's house. The act brought her into the household's sacred routine. The wedding sequence did not end simply because the torches had gone out and the public company had withdrawn. The offering was modest in physical scale compared with the procession. It required no street filled with singing guests and no bright line of moving flame. It belonged among the domestic rooms and sacred objects that would remain after the wedding celebration had passed. The threshold crossed the previous night now stood in daylight. Beyond it, the street returned to ordinary use. Inside, the marriage couch remained where the pronuba had guided the bride. The knot was no longer taut, and the flame-colored veil had completed the public task for which it had been worn. The bride's morning offering completes the documented movement from dusk to dawn. The procession had not been directed only toward a private bed. It had carried her into continuing household life, including participation in the religious customs of the house. The sequence had narrowed and then opened again, though not in the same way. At dusk, the bride left her father's home to be seen in the street. In the morning, she appeared within another home as a participant in its domestic observances. No spectators needed to gather around the marriage couch for the transfer to be complete. The morning offering expressed what the journey had been approaching. Not merely one closed chamber, but a place within an ongoing household. The songs and walnuts belonged to the root, the safely crossed sill belonged to the entrance, the pronuba belonged to the approach to privacy, the loosened knot belonged to the chamber, and the offering belonged to what followed. Here, the surviving sequence reaches its settled conclusion. The bride is inside the house that waited beyond the torchlit doorway, and the first clearly recorded act after the wedding night is an offering made to the gods of that household. The morning rooms now hold the objects of the evening without the movement that once surrounded them. Near the household gods rests the first offering. It is small beside the memory of the procession, yet it belongs exactly where that long route was leading. Farther inside, the marriage couch remains in place. The respected matron who guided the bride toward it has gone. The guests who gathered beyond the chamber have withdrawn. The room no longer marks the edge of a ceremony. It has returned to the larger stillness of the house. The Hercules knot is loose. At dusk it held the bride's tunic, while the bright veil and formal braids marked her robe. It remained tied through the torchlit street and the carefully managed entrance. Its journey ended only after the chamber door had closed. The threshold remains where it always was, a narrow band of worn stone between interior and street. Nothing about its shape has changed. Yet it has been crossed without the stumble that the wedding company took such care to avoid. Beyond it, a few walnuts may remain where they rolled from the procession. They are no longer flying through torchlight or drawing laughter from the guests. They lie unnoticed at the edges of the route, small against the street. The songs have passed as well. Their ribald humor does not need to be recovered word for word. It is enough to remember that they once followed the flame-colored veil between two houses, making the wedding briefly part of the surrounding city. The torches have gone with the night. Their light no longer gathers around the doorway or moves across the paving. Morning gives the house a steadier outline, reaching over the same sill that seemed so important only hours before. Inside, the veil provides the warmest remaining color. It no longer has to distinguish the bride within a crowd. Its public task is finished. The fabric can rest without movement. The route can now be followed through objects rather than people. The veil recalls the father's house. The walnuts recall the street. The threshold recalls the careful entrance. The couch recalls the pronuber's final guidance. The loose cord recalls the private chamber. And the offering belongs to morning. Each has come to rest in its own part of the house or city. Nothing more is required from the procession. The transfer has been made. The sill has been safely cleared, and the boundary of the chamber has been respected. Outside, the street extends beyond the doorway, emptied of its line of torches. Inside, the household has absorbed the ceremony into familiar rooms and ordinary routines. The offering remains near the household gods. The couch rests deeper in shadow. Between them lies the interior through which the bride was guided after the public noise fell away. The house cannot explain what the sources do not tell us. It simply holds what remains: a bright veil, a loosened cord, a safely crossed threshold, and an offering placed at the beginning of the morning. The marriage couch rests in shadow. Beside it, the loosened cord lies without tension near the flame-colored veil, one warm fold in the morning room. The threshold opens toward a street emptied of guests and song. Daylight reaches across the worn sill and settles on the floor. Near the household gods sits the bride's first offering, undisturbed. Nothing crosses the doorway now. The procession has passed beyond hearing. Its torches are out, and the scattered walnuts lie unnoticed in the street. Within the house, light remains on the threshold that was crossed with such care. The doorway stands open, but no songs return through it. The veil no longer moves. The knot is no longer tied. Near the household gods, the offering stays where it was placed. Familiar rooms have taken back their ordinary shapes. The public celebration has faded into household life. Morning settles over the quiet house.